Good morning, Dundee, UK. Good afternoon, India. Good evening. Good evening, New Zealand and Australia. And I think it's the middle of the day also for Israel. So I am really, really excited to be your mistress of ceremonies today. My name is Professor Fiona Kumari Campbell. I am a Professor of Disability and Ableism Studies at the University of Dundee, and also the co-lead of the Peripheries research group, which is sponsoring this event, along with external relations at the University of Dundee. So welcome. This is our last event for Disability History Month, and we've put on an amazing range of events. It's been really exciting this year. So we've just been, thank you for your patience. We're just going through the logistics of organising different time zones and dealing with software issues. Now, speaking of software issues, we are using Teams Live as an application, and unfortunately that does not allow for dual screens. So we were unable to provide BSL for this event. The Teams product apparently is rolling out some new software at the end of December. So apologies for that, but Emma will be posting some information about how to use live captioning, so she will put that in the Q&A. So so let me just kind of outline what we're going to be looking at. I said it's fantastic that we've got this global panel, mainly of disability studies scholars, but not all disability studies scholars. So some people work in areas other than disability. And we will explore, in the time that we've got, our personal journeys and the opportunities we've had, but also barriers to undertaking research. The event will be recorded for later, so we look forward for you to viewing that again. Now, I'm just going to say a little bit about the panelists and the context of this event as well. Firstly, I'd like to say that Debbie Foster, who was from the University of Cardiff in Wales, was scheduled to be on the panel, but she's unfortunately unwell, and that is disappointing, but that's life. And I really would recommend Debbie Foster's work around her legally disabled project. I want to set the context of this meeting around disabled researchers and leadership in universities. And I want to draw on an excellent chapter by Nicola Martin called Practical Responses to Ableism in Leadership in Higher Education. And it's in the book. Let me see if I can grab the book here for you. It's in the book Ableism in Academia. Ableism in Academia. Anyway, if you can't see it, you can have a look at that. It's an excellent book. And her comments relate mainly to the UK, but I do think they have application to other country contexts. She says that the literature around leadership almost completely ignores disability. Now, that shouldn't come as a surprise, because the data indicates that the majority of leaders in higher education are still mainly non-disabled white men between the ages of 46 and 55. So that's in the UK. She also talks about barriers. And what are the barriers? Barriers, lack of access to leadership training and ableism in many forms, including the tyranny of low expectations. And I thought that was really interesting. But there are enablers, things that allow and support and promote leadership, and that is a supportive, well-organised environment, and the personal characteristics of disabled people, who often bring exceptional strategic and team development skills to the table. So I just want to very briefly say, what is the data? Well, at the very senior end in the UK, did you know that only 5 of the 170 heads of institutions identify as disabled? I mean, that's quite stark. And in fact, fewer professors than academics below the professorial level identified themselves as having an impairment, only 2.5%. So what we have is a situation where today's panelists represent not just a unique perspective, but we are a rare species. It is very unusual to have disabled researchers working in universities across the globe. And in some countries, it's even more urgent. Disabled people are more disadvantaged from accessing higher education, let alone getting jobs in the academy. Disabled people are locked out of the labour market, despite our experience and our qualifications. So that's something we're going to touch on today. So let me talk to you about who the panelists are, and then I'm going to ask them some questions. So, and please excuse if I am mispronouncing your name in any way. So we have Dr. Huhana Hickey. She's an independent researcher, a panel member of the Human Rights Review Tribunal, managing director of Pekenga Consultancy from Aotearoa, New Zealand. So welcome, Huhana. We have Professor Anita Ghai from the School of Human Studies from Ambedkar University in New Delhi in India, and she's also one of the editors in Disability in Society. So welcome, good to see you. We have Dr. Anne Ferguson, who's a lecturer in law and criminology from the School of Business and Law, Central Queensland University, Australia. So welcome, Anne. Anne and I first met each other in a disability car park. So that's where disabled people often hang out. That's where we first met each other. Over to Dr. Carmit-Noa Shpigelman, Senior Lecturer, Department of Community Medicine, University of Haifa in Israel. Welcome. And we're just waiting on, I'm not sure whether she's arrived yet, so hopefully she'll come in at some point, Dr. Michelle Moore, who's head of the Centre for Social Justice and Global Responsibility at London South Bank University, and she is the editor-in-chief of the world-leading journal Disability and Society. So, and myself, as I said, Mistress of Ceremonies, Fiona Kumari Campbell. I am a Professor of Disability and Ableism Studies. It's a world first in disability, and I am also one of the executive editors of the journal Disability in Society. So the first question, and I will ask each panelist by name to respond to it. So a very brief summary, so we've just got to fit the times in here. I'm going to ask each of you if you can just very briefly tell me about your research background and your interests, because we've already told the audience what your position is and where you work, but just very briefly. So I might first go to Anne.
Hi, Fiona and other panels and out there. I am in law and criminology. I do research into rehabilitation, also into sex work and decriminalisation. What else do I do? White collar crime and corruption. They're the areas that I really kind of love, and they're the areas that I tend to research into. I also have organised crime that I get involved with originally through my PhD.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that. I hope you're not involved in organised crime. That was an interesting expression of phrase.
Yeah,
so
well,
Yep. So now I'm going to ask Huhana. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, because you're actually not working in a university?
Kia ora. Hello, everybody. My name's Huhana. No, I'm not working in a university because we don't have very many people employed that are disabled at university as academics. We have, I think, one professor. That's it. We have very few academics that have lived experience. So it's a big issue. Can't get tenure, can't get support. And so you do what you can, but I can no longer finance myself trying to get that kind of work. Currently, I'm involved in a piece of research called Te Ao Marama, which means a new beginning, which is a piece of work around Māori disabled and looking at how we view ourselves, what our identity means. And I have a particular interest. My background is I did an LLB BSOC Sci, so I did a Bachelor of Social Sciences, a Bachelor of Laws. I gained a brain injury during that time. Although my diagnosis is MS, I was beaten up by my ex-partner. And as a result, my grades went from A to D, got back up there, got first class honours in laws in 2001 and got a PhD in law in tikanga Māori, which is about Māori practices. I have a particular interest with Indigenous peoples and their ability to be self-determining. And in the area of disability, the problem we've got is that it's all Western based. So the Western ideology dominates our discourse, and it actually harms Indigenous people in a big way. As well-meaning as they are, it's harmful. It's hurting Māori in New Zealand. Māori disabled are the most disparate group in this country. Māori non-disabled are the second most disparate group, and disabled people generally are not. And so that indicates a lot of the issue that sits with Indigenous. My background is I'm half Sami. I'm also Māori, Aboriginal and Navajo. So I have a particular interest in intersectionality, identity, gender binary, gender, sexuality, and particularly from an Indigenous perspective, more that way now than I used to be. I've also been involved as a lawyer in the area of triple PR's guardianship laws around capacity and dealing with the human rights aspect of what's happening. I've managed to so far get about 20 prisoners out of jail that are disabled, basically found that their cases were appallingly done, and many of them were languishing in there because no one cared. We still find some that have been sitting in there for 50 years. We're slowly finding them and getting them out, but it's a big job. So while I'm not in a university, I am often contracted on research. So I engage as I'm invited to, and do whatever I can.
Thanks very much for that. That's brilliant. We'll touch on some of those issues later. If I could ask Anita to come forward and just briefly summarise your research interests, Anita.
Okay, so thank you, Fiona, and thank you, everyone. It's lovely to meet you. I was trained in psychology, just to kind of put the thing straight. And then, of course, my interest of, being a woman with disability, I became interested in disability studies. So now, of course, in Ambedkar, I teach on disability studies. But it took a long time, I would retire in about, 3 years. But my interest has been in the area of like gender, of women's movement, in India, and also of, issues such as care, which I've, largely worked on, and looked at the mothers and the daughters, how the care recipients, what do they experience, and how do they understand care compared to the mothers. And the third area is, for example, sexuality. And there again, I've looked at, how gender and sexuality can be, researched in one particular sense. And one final, this thing which interests me is the prenatal selection, because in India, the abortion law, allows disabled people, disabled fetuses to be, kind of aborted. And only issue is about the sex selection, which is a very serious one with us, because, girls obviously, and there it becomes a legal act, this thing, pointer that you can actually punish them. So that is something which is really, which bothers me, because disability seems to be, which I think is many countries also is there. So in one particular sense, I think I also finally I have reached a point where I try to look at the knowledge construction of disability in almost every possible way that I can think of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita. And over to Dr. Carmit, please. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you, Fiona. Hello, everyone. So I'm Carmit-Noa Shpigelman. I'm a senior lecturer and researcher in disability studies at the Department of Community Mental Health at the University of Haifa in Israel. I focus mainly on social and emotional aspects of living with a disability and promoting research project that focus on quality of life and well-being and community participation of people with disabilities. My current two main research interests are parents with disabilities. From my own experience, I'm a single mom by choice, so I focus on this topic. And another main research topic is how to use the social media to empower people with disabilities, to include them in the community, in the physical community as well as in the online community. The third topic that it's related to social media is using digital technologies in general by people with disabilities for communication, for social connection. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We're still having problems getting Michelle on board at the moment, but when she comes in, she can have a chance to introduce herself. So before moving to the questions, I probably, as MC, should say a little bit about my research interests. So I have a background in law and sociology. I'm very interested in the theorisation of disability, social constructions, and my area of focus in the last 2 decades has been developing what's known as studies in ableism, and basically trying to elaborate on what that concept means and how it works and how it can be provided to research, and how it also can be used as a strategy for intervening in the lived experiences of disabled people. I do work on law and disability, both in the UK, Australia and Sri Lanka. So I'm of Sri Lankan heritage, so I do a lot of work around Sri Lankan concepts of disability, law and women. And particularly at the moment, I'm working on a project around women in Sri Lanka who have been detained. In fact, not only have they been detained, they have what's called no release detention. In other words, there's no date to get out of prison. And finally, I'm working in the area of knowledges. What do I mean by that? Looking at how non-Western traditions, non-Western ethics, non-Western worldviews and non-Western research methodologies can be applied to social issues. So it gives you an indication of my background. So I'm going to move on to now the first question. So it's a tricky one, and and you can respond to it in the way in which you wish. So the first question is, have you actively disclosed your disability in the workplace, or has this been undertaken on a case-by-case basis? Acknowledging that disclosure is something that's a process. It takes place continually over a period of time. So I thought I might first go over to Anita and just wait to get to the red screen, Anita.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you that I joined because I was trained in psychology. So I joined Jesus and Mary College, Delhi University, in 1984. You know, when disability wasn't really talked about at that time. So as such, I mean, I was. I had polio, so I I could walk at that time, but now I'm a kind of a wheelchair user. So, but I did not have to hide anything about my disability. There was no question about that. And the problem was that the infrastructure was so bad that, you know, moving in and away, I mean, out and, you know, I mean, doing various things, that was slightly, tiring all the time, because, you know, the strength which was needed to kind of, you know, work. And things like library shelves and all that are always problematic. They're still problematic, you know. I mean, from how do you carry the book from the top shelf, you know? So you are always, needing support, you know, from the librarian or whatever, but they were, of course, fine. So as such, the workspace was fine. I mean, I did not experience any particular, research problems were not there. I could do whatever I wanted to do. But yes, the access issues were really very, very, important and critical. And as I, became older and older, I think the problems really enhanced my, existence in that particular sense. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. We might follow up those issues. Thank you very much. Carmit.
Yeah. So in my case, I can't hide my disability. I have a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis since I was 2 years old. And the result, I cope with a mobility issue. So my disability, my physical disability is visible. I have to say that usually I talk openly about my disability with a close friend, colleague, but it was not the situation in the past. I have to tell that it was hard for me to talk about my disability a few years ago, and I think that the turning point was when I moved to Chicago, University of Illinois, between 2010 and 2012 for postdoctoral position. And there I met a lot of faculty staff and students with disabilities. And I experienced a community of disabled people. And the culture in the city was very accessible, and they promoted disability issue, including the disability parade, which was the first time that I actually participate in such parade. And I believe that it had a positive impact on my own disability identity journey. So now I can tell that I definitely talk and openly talk about my disability, as well in front of my students. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Carmit. I think what you've highlighted there is that one's journey changes over time, and is constantly being re-articulated, and the importance of exposure to other disabled people, because you don't feel isolated, and how that in turn that exposure changes your sense of self. I might go now to Anne, please, if you could talk about your experiences.
Okay, well, I look normal, shall I say, but I'm a dead giveaway in the fact that I travel everywhere with a dog. So I have a guide dog, and I'm visually impaired, so it's pretty hard to kind of go, oh no. I find it over time I have become able to talk about it. And I find that students are probably more receptive than the academy itself. I think for me, one of the big things is everybody assumes it's a one size fits all model, that if someone can read, well, I should be able to read it. If someone, different colours, that should work. And on, just for example, we have our corporate colours are green and some yucky kind of grey thing. I can't see either of those colours. And I had a bit of an altercation when I got told I had to do PowerPoints in corporate colours. And I went, okay, can't see them. So the next meeting I had, I won't exactly use the phrase I used, but I did say, well, I can do that, but I can't see to actually present them. So I think that that's one thing that is really disempowering in a way, is having to deal with bureaucracy. And so for me, that's a continual fight, as I think we all experience. It's a continual fight to make grounds, and then someone kind of goes, oh, you have to do this way, and you can't. So But the dog always adds interest. So, you know, the students are very, very good and will always ask. So I'm quite happy to tell students what I can and can't do. Once I do that, it's really nice later in the semester if they come up to me and say, oh, and could you look at this? And I kind of go, well, could you send it to me? Because it actually means they've got over the fact that I have a disability and, you know, they're just accepting. So, yeah, that's my story. And yes, we did meet in the car park.
We did. We met in the car park, and you're actually right. You're actually right, because I was pushing my wheelchair and then I saw this woman with a dog. Actually, dogs are not common on university campuses in Australia, so I obviously knew that. I thought, oh, this woman's visually impaired, and we got chatting about what it's like to be a disabled. Well, you were a PhD student at the time, staff member, so it was kind of like spot the disabled moment, which kind of builds on Commit's comment earlier. It's that exposure to other people with disabilities. Okay, so on to Huhana. Would you like to talk about your experiences?
Okay, kia ora. Well, heck, you know, when you're in a wheelchair, it kind of like makes it obvious for itself. So unless you use it as a choice of transport, you're kind of out there. So the story of my life is that I've never been hidden, okay? I've been out in everything I do. Closets are not accessible, so closets don't suit me. And that's the argument I make. I came out as a lesbian many years ago. I've come out as a lot of things, but, you know, I'm always coming out to the point I'm sick of coming out. I just want to go in the closet for 5 minutes and feel that little bit of lovely closetiness, but I can't. I mean, look at me. I can't hide. I made the decision in August to definitely identify that I'm Māori by putting my moko kauai on my face. And as a result, it means that I'm not hiding as an Indigenous person. I'm a light-skinned one, even though I'm all Indigenous. I'm not that colour. But for me, it was about stamping again my identity, and identity is really important for me. I was adopted at birth. So my adoption papers had me down as an imbecile and an idiot. And my family believed that I was disabled intellectually for all my life. So no one actually expected me to achieve anything. So my whole journey has been one of fighting, one of trying to get out of someone's arms, whether they were an abuser, whether they were family that didn't understand. So I spent a lot of time angry. So I entered education later in life. And I have to say, you're right, Anita, in the 80s, there wasn't much around disability back then. I met my first disabled person who was a Vietnamese refugee, who I'd also never met a refugee before, who had polio. And from there it grew. My son grew up with disabled friends where he'd prefer to go to the special needs unit and hang with them than hang with ableds because he got on with them better. The attitudes are changing from what I saw when I was younger. Words like imbecile, idiot doesn't exist anymore as far as formal language goes to describe somebody, but we've still got a long way to go. And so I guess coming out's the story of my life. I mean, I should maybe write a book called, you know, Coming Out Daily, because I always am. And the funny thing is, even with a service dog, people don't get it. I had a service dog, he passed away in August, and they kept saying to me, he's a guide dog. I said, no. Yes, he's guiding a blind person who's in a power chair, who's pushing it along while he's behind me. Yep, he's my guide dog, all right. People really don't understand, but I think the more visible we are, the more that it actually places on them the onus of having to see us. I was very encouraged, and I'll end on this, that I received a letter last week. I've been training in disability in medical students. I got an email to say, and this is the first time ever, that the medical students wrote a petition to the dean of the school to ask that they put disability into the core curriculum with Māori and Pacific peoples and LGBTQI. We've always been the optional subject matter, even though in the health system we're the big users. And they got it. It wasn't about curing us or fixing us. It wasn't about wheelchair hoists and how to wipe our asses. It was actually about who we are and what society does, and that even if they can't fix or cure us, they need to treat us the same way they treat ableds in the health system. So there is hope. I don't give up on hope. and I'm encouraged, but we still have a long way to go. And that's been, my journey has been very hard getting work in academia. They will not support. They will not give you the breaks that you need. And frankly, I've given up, but I still lecture. I still do guest lectureships and I still do research. So I'm hopeful for the next generation. There's a bunch of young people out there coming through who are amazing. I'm getting to the age where it's time to mentor them. My dreams can't be achieved to what I wanted truly, but I can help them achieve theirs, and that's what I'm aiming to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I totally get you with the experience. I mean, I guess it's interesting. We've got a big age range here, but I think, you know, it's again for the audience and particularly for the younger folk in the audience. I mean, we've lived through quite a revolution in many ways since 1981, which was the International Year of Disabled People. I can remember it. It had the slogan, "Break down the barriers." Still relevant today, but we've had this change in expectations from no expectations, as Huhana has raised, and also Anita, is the issue of when I started out, I was a university student when I became disabled, so that was 1981, and it was assumed that I would leave university because disabled people didn't go to university. And then I was offered work in a sheltered workshop, putting lids on bottles, knives and forks in airline bags back in the days when we had real knives and forks, earning 50 cents a day. And that was to be my life and to live in a nursing home as well. And I only put up with that for a few weeks, and then joined as a volunteer, a research centre run by and for disabled people. And again, we have this theme of disabled people. But I think the other point that I picked up from many of you today with that question is the importance of visibility, the importance of our presence. Sometimes our presence is obvious, but then there are also assumptions about what our disability means. So even for those of you who use dogs or use wheelchairs, for example, whilst you can't necessarily hide your impairment, there are some assumptions made by the community and the students and other academics about what that impairment means. But as I think the other issue that I picked up from what people said was it gets tiring, this constant coming out and having to do the emotional work, the heavy lifting, and what are the accumulative effects now. And many of our panelists are probably at the late stages of their career, and I'm sure have said it's been a difficult road, and what are the effects of constantly having to do the hard work. But we do make choices. And before I move on to the next question, even in my own situation, so I'm known as a wheelchair user, but only recently have I come out as autistic. And a lot of people have asked me, well, why didn't you say that you were autistic earlier? We've known you in the field for nearly 30 years now, and you've never said you're autistic. Because in Australia, it actually, my autism didn't affect me. I learnt the cultural norms, learnt the way people communicated, yeah? So it wasn't such a big issue. But moving to a new country in 2017 to Scotland, I didn't have those cultural messages. And you would be surprised to know that Scottish people communicate quite differently from Australians. So in fact, that magnified my experience of autism. And so I decided at that point to come out, and that's been a really important journey. So we might just move on then, is to look at why are the experiences of disabled researchers invisible in the academy? What kinds of attitude, and I guess teasing this out, what kinds of attitudes have you experienced from co-workers or your employer around disability? So I might move first to take Anne to start off with that response.
Okay. It's a really interesting question. Attitudes have been very varied, of assumptions or lack of assumptions, or a lack of even thought. I mean, I have been told to take my dog outside or put him away because it was a male dog I had at that stage, because dogs were dirty inside. So I had to really fight, and I was giving a lecture, and I'm in the corridor and was just gutted. It was the first time that I had actually encountered that sort of thing, whereas with students, I'd found students really good. I think the other thing with attitudes, as I said before, is that, you know, one size fits all. And I think sometimes they're happy to do the lip service of what you need to have done, but that really doesn't translate into what they're actually going to do for you. And that's not bagging where I work. It's just a fact of how it is. And I do agree. You know, even though you have a service animal or wheelchair, those things are almost completely invisible to other people. So that if you need something, I often say, well, my dog's not a bloody handbag. You know, when people kind of go, oh, yeah, it's over there. Well, where's there? You know, yeah, so it's really quite interesting. And yes, I do get sick of fighting, and I think, like everybody else, you know, you feel at times that you have to do more, you have to be better than everybody else, and because otherwise you won't be employed within the academy.
Thanks, Anne. I was actually going to ask you that question, so that's great. So that idea of feeling like you have to be twice as good, and that idea of not drawing, you know, not causing trouble, and not acting like a burden. Anita, over to you. You're live.
Yeah. So as Anne said, that attitudes are very, I mean, really, I mean, there are people who are more sensitive and they attend to, you know, whatever the issues are. You know, but myself, I mean, even me, I mean, like, you know, I do remember, because I wear Indian clothes, and there used to be, like, you know, what we call it as the pants, which is called the salwar. And I would have a big bottom of the salwar so that my shoes would be hidden on that, you know, and I wouldn't want to kind of, you know, indicate to them, so that I could normalize myself at that time. And I mean, you know, so the calipers were, like, you know, something which I didn't like. And yet I did not understand that the gate is still there, you know, nobody can kind of, you know, change that, you know, in that sense. So it took me time, you know, and in that time I came to the point where now I can wear, you know, you could say tights, and I can wear the calipers on it, you know, so that anybody can see it. So I don't care. I mean, like, you know, even if they are seeing it. So it took a lot of time. But the major problem was that when I was trained in psychology, disability in psychology was just a category in which they were only trying to see the negativity of disability, you know, which was there. And, you know, they would say that the differences between men and women, and then they would say how many blind people, how many, you know, handicapped people, how many deaf people, and the normal people. Now, it was amazing how they find this normal people just because their body is normal, you know, and whether mind is, you know, normal or not is a different question. So it took me a lot of time in also, you know, going up to something like a critical psychology, you know, to begin with. And then, of course, you know, thinking about, and by that time, I must mention this, that, you know, I somehow became interested only in cricket, only in, you know, cinema and television, and my own, you know, personhood, you know, the sexuality, you know, it was as if I couldn't take it up. I had forgotten about it completely, you know, because, you know, I have written somewhere in one of my books where I would say that nobody ever whistled at me, you know, though, I mean, because there was a indication that you're not, I mean, you're asexual in that particular sense, but the abuse could happen anywhere to anyone in that particular sense. So I think it took me a lot of time to bring disability as a social category, and also to bring it within academia, and that has been my problem, which is still there, because there would be, you can count on your fingers, 4 or 5 universities that must be, dealing with something like disability studies, but otherwise, they only think of it as a concessional category, in which you can kind of, talk about and all that. And also even within the women's movement, I think that was why like serious problem, because, they would look at the caregiver, yes, to some extent, and the labor, but they would never look at the recipient who was kind of, getting this, care from the others, as if we cannot contribute anything. So the idea of interdependence was not there at all, even within the women's movement, who I thought were my, I could align with them. No, I can say that in some years they have now started listening to, all these issues, but it has taken me almost, this is my, you could say 37th year of teaching, and at 62, I mean, I'm always thinking that maybe I will die, but the dream is that, there could be a disabled friendly world, but disabled friendly world in academia as well, because knowledge construction, I think, is very, very critical for me.
Right.
So that's
Right.
it.
Thank you very much, Anita. That's great, and I think it's that thing about ploughing away, having disability not just be thought of as a need, but as a right. You raised a really important issue about sexuality and being seen as a whole vital person. But then again, there's this issue of presence, and it seems like our very presence and the kind of interactions, the interdependency, can sometimes reduce those myths, but it can be awkward. The other thing I'm picking up is this absolute sense of isolation, and
Yes.
and we'll pick this up later about, well, what do we do when we go home at the end of the day? How do we debrief? How do we process those experiences? I'm going to have a go again back to Carmit, and if you could keep your answers short, because we've got a couple of questions to go through. So over to you, Carmit.
Okay, great. So now I'm unmute. Thank you, and sorry for the technical issue earlier. I believe that disability is still perceived as weakness by the general society, the non-disabled people, as well as, I have to say, by disabled people. And it takes me again to the topic of disclosure. For example, in Israel in 2017, an amendment of the Israeli Equal Rights Law enforced the public sector, including university, to hire at least 5% of their employers, people with disabilities. And yesterday, I asked someone from the administrative staff to provide data about my own university in Haifa. And I figured out that of 600 academic staff at the University of Haifa, only 2 academic staff, only 2 professors actually disclosed their disabilities and asked for accommodation. So I believe it's related to the general topic of attitudes and disclosure, as we talked before. Another issue is that the environmental barrier. For example, when a PhD student completes his dissertation, in Israel it's expected from the PhD student to go abroad for a postdoctoral studies. And it's a limiting situation for disabled people in terms of socioeconomic status, health issues, social needs, like family support. I had a chance to do that, go abroad to Chicago for postdoctoral studies, but no every disabled researcher can do that. And without a postdoctoral position abroad, I couldn't come back to Israel and get a tenure track position. So we have to take it into consideration, the environmental barriers for disabled people.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. And I think it's I think what we're seeing, as I've reiterated, I would suggest around the world, where there are disabled academics in universities, they underreport. Right. So I think they're small in number, but then we have this magnification because disabled academics are underreporting, under-disclosing, and that will be a topic for another seminar. This is a really, really vital area to discover what the complexities are, what the dimensions are behind the decision not to report. So I won't go on about that because we've got about 15 minutes more to cover. So I'm going to go to Huhana just to respond to that question. And Huhana, if you could keep your comments brief, that would be great.
I'll try and be as brief as I can. My whole journey at university was shit, okay, from day one. And generically, it started out very boring. I was a generic disabled person like everyone else. It seemed to be the same. Then I discovered Anita's work. I discovered women's studies. And Anita, you are my muse, along with several other several other disabled women academics I'd never heard of in my life, and discovered a whole world. And then I got disappointed again because then I became an academic and it became shit. No accommodations were made. When I did get a room because I used Dragon, I had another academic so angry and jealous that as soon as I didn't get tenure, she went and got the room for herself. And now she's apparently got tenure. So not only do I compete with able-bodieds, I compete with jealous people. My last postdoc piece of work has actually become part of a treaty claim, and I'm proud of that because I'm also, the Crown lawyers are refusing to allow any providers or any others go first in the next round of tribunal hearings. I'm the first up. And it's a little disconcerting, but it's exciting because it's the first time we've ever had Māori disabled, ever heard as Māori disabled. And quite frankly, I've gone full circle in all my studies, so I'll end it on this. At the beginning, I thought disability was the Western concept. Today, I think we've got it all wrong. Māori do not see disability as non-Māori see disability. We don't see our whānau or our family as disabled people. We see them as family. And we've gone away from all that. And so we've actually got a real problem in that they're trying to force us into a colonised view, and they will not allow us to have our own voice and our position from our Indigenous view. And that is where we have a long way to go.
Well said. And nicely brief as well, with a lot of passion there. And I think for those of us who negotiate disability and non-Western cultures, we often exist in the twilight zone because we're dealing with Western constructions of disability, and at the same time we're dealing with our own cultural heritage. So, for example, in my case, coming from a Sri Lankan background, I have to deal with other cultural attitudes to what it means to be a woman in an extremely patriarchal society, and different expressions of disability. There are some affirmative approaches, but in general they're quite negative and if not superstitious. For example, the role of karma and this idea that you had sinned in a previous life and many previous lives. So I think often actually one of the other side to it is what I've heard everybody say here is they've had to reappraise their thinking, dig deep, draw on a range of experiences and knowledges. So in fact, actually, we are very talented in juggling ambiguity, ambivalence, and drawing from a range of sources. But very much we are in between people often because we don't fit anywhere nicely and neatly. Okay, so I want to move on to the next question. I managed to take another 5 minutes from the Q&A, so we've got about 10 minutes in all. The next question is how did you negotiate your expectations around productivity and how it affects your impairment? I mean, I know, again, just to kind of kickstart, in my case, I experience chronic pain and fatigue. It can't be seen unless I complain about it. So I have to kind of have time out during my day. I have to lie down. I'm often very, very sick. So I do work at strange hours, you know, or I'm making up for days that I can't do work. But I'm not public about that because increasingly in our neo-managerial environment, which most universities globally, we are doing more and more work, even under COVID-19, the work has increased, not decreased. And I'm wondering then the idea of what is a productive worker? It's often based on as I've said in my own work, an unencumbered person, a person who doesn't have carer responsibilities, a person who has somebody at home to cook them dinner, to do their washing, to transport them, to tell them they're a great person. You've done a great job. You know, and a person who's available to travel anywhere, anytime. So this idea of the unencumbered worker, and we know that disabled people and women rarely fit that mold. However, we've internalized a lot of the baggage around this about what does it mean to be a contributor? What does it mean to be productive? How do we negotiate those issues, and also our issues around internalizing ableism that we've often had to work through our own issues around feeling like a burden or feeling like we don't want to show that we're too needy. So I might go over to Carmit first.
Okay. The same story, I believe. I think that universities usually focus and address the physical needs of disabled researchers. On ergonomic design, for example, in my case, they suggested and did some changes in the furniture in my office, and provided me a bigger computer screen, but still they miss and don't refer to the other needs of disabled researchers, especially if we're talking about chronic pains and fatigue as a result of the health condition. In such case, for example, the academic requirements are the same for disabled and non-disabled researchers. I wish I had less hours of teaching or more time frame for research achievement. But unfortunately, it's not the case, and I wish I will be able to change it in the future. I'm trying to. I'm a member in different committees in Israel that are trying to promote these issues.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, if people could keep their questions or responses brief, over to Anne, please.
I think it's the same as everybody else, and I did speak before about feeling that you can't be a burden and that you are continually feeling like you have to do more and more to prove yourself. In my case, I don't necessarily have the physical pain, but it's the fatigue from continuing at a screen, which causes me a great deal of discomfort as the day wears on. And I think, as I said before, it's about getting on a level playing field and people making adjustments or accommodations, but actually asking you what you need, not that assumption of this is what you need. And you know, sort of realising, in my case, I don't see whether the full stop's there or whether there's a space between. And so that pedantic thing. But yeah, so I think it's like everybody else. It's just more and more that you feel you have to do without those considerations.
Thanks, Anne. And I guess again, it's what we do with that. Just moving very quickly to Anita.
Yeah,
teachers love the sound of their voice, no? So I'm trying to kind of, go away. Okay. No, I mean, I want to say two things. I mean, which is kind of amazing and yet not amazing. I have been given, responsibilities. By the university for everything, like a library chairperson, sexual harassment chairperson, and I mean for everyone, not only for the disabled. I mean, like in that particular sense, which is good. I mean, like but of course the exhaustion that is there is there. But when I came to this university, I mean, the issue was not of the room. They gave me a decent room, but the toilet which was there was one where I had to kind of taper the height of like how I could get in with the wheelchair. And that toilet, I was told that you can lock it up if you want. And when I realized that lock it up, I looked at other and I asked them that who all uses, and I realized that most of the faculty women, I mean, women would use the same toilet, So if I was to lock this up, then how would the other women actually, which toilet will they use, And because there was paucity of like, I mean, there was no other toilet, and I actually said that please go ahead and use it, and just try not to have too much water in the toilet, because I mean, I can slip and I can fall. I mean, once I get out of the wheelchair into that. So, but I don't think they were really not, I mean, thankful in one sense. I mean, I could have locked it, but I didn't lock it, I mean, in that sense. And the other part which is there is that, because you are, because I took away, I mean, I took up these responsibilities, there were many colleagues who actually don't talk to you much. So when I tried asking my friend, I mean, my colleague, who's there in my school, that what have I done? I mean, they don't talk to me much. And this one said that they are actually so envious of you because, you have gone through, I mean, like I've had a love affair with the doctors. So I've gone through cancer. I've gone through 2 open heart surgeries in which I have a metallic valve. So I'm on life-saving medications. And yet I could do everything, which could be done. So they would feel so envious or I don't know what. I mean, I still haven't understood. Okay. That they wouldn't really take me as a ordinary person, like who would be your colleague in sense, So that's one.
Thanks, Anita. Thank you. We just need to, Anita. We need to move on to the next person because we're running out of time. So my humble apologies to you for that. Huhana, again, just a very brief comment from you. Huhana, yep.
2 things. First, yes, the passive aggressiveness of other staff was a big issue. There was no accommodation. I fatigue, so I asked that I could have flexible hours. No, I had to be in the office 9 to 5. And that fatigued me quickly. There is no accommodation made. And if they do make any, they make you feel so guilty that you're afraid to ask because then you're afraid you won't get tenure. So they put fear into you. And I was constantly under so much stress that I had a massive MS flare up 3 months after I finished my tenure, my 4 years at AUT. And to the point I ended up paralysed down one side and all of that. But the other thing that was really hilariously funny is how they treated me when they decided to make all the disability toilets gender neutral. And on the internet, the staff were moaning, I don't want a man in our toilet. And then I had to remind them that men have always been in the disability loos because they've always been gender neutral. and they got all upset and stopped all the emails. My service dog, it wasn't the students, it was the staff that would go and complain about, oh, but he's dirty, he's a dog. And I'm going, well, so what? You're dirty too. So maybe, maybe you two need to meet up and work out how to get cleaner. But, I think humour helps, and I think humour is a big thing, and it's a dark humour a lot of disabled have. Because if you don't have humour, you just end up in this world of desperation and depression. So I just say, half the time you got to laugh. If you fall, you laugh, whatever. And humour gets you through.
I think you're absolutely right here. And, what I've picked up from the whole session today is issues around envy and jealousy. Those are the two words that came up, which is really interesting. The lack of contact, the social distancing, the whole in and out groups. So, and that raises questions about what does integration and mainstreaming actually mean? Because if you're in a mainstreamed environment, but either people don't talk to you or are detached from you, that raises all sorts of issues. Passive aggression, I think that also has come out as a theme today. And then we've got, well, this idea of institutional ableism actually kills and actually harms because of the being in a state of perpetual fear and stress and anxiety. That can actually be destroy people's health. So I'm going to move to questions. I will say out here today, great panel, great discussions, and we haven't covered everything. I reckon there's a book in this, folks, on disabled researchers. I think that would be really interesting, but we'll speak privately later on that. So thank you for everybody. Now we've got a good range of questions, which is brilliant. So I'm going to go through them. We've got roughly 20 minutes or so for questions. And again, if you can keep your answers very, very brief so we can get through the questions. So I've had one question here. All this research sounds fascinating. When conducting research, is there any recognition of the potential different experiences of those who become disabled later in life compared to those who may have a lifelong disability? So I don't know who would like to respond to that. Would anyone like to respond to that? Maybe Carmit?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can answer the second or the first part, people who become disabled. But because I have a long life disability, but I can tell that I believe that my disability makes me more aware of and being sensitive to the needs of the disability community, of people with disabilities around me. And that's what I'm trying to do in my research project, to promote changes, to do research project with an impact, how to change the environmental barriers, and how to promote the quality of life of people with disabilities. I also believe that as a lecturer with a disability, I kind of serve as a positive role model for my students with and without disabilities, which in turn may promote attitude change.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, Huhana, I think you wanted to jump in there. Keep it brief.
Yep. Well, just there is really no real accommodation difference made in universities, but often you'll find people who are previously abled are often accepted much easier than others with certain other disabilities. It's very hard to say that that's across the board because different disabilities get different reactions, and so it depends on what the disability is, whether it's visible, not visible, or whether people understand it or not. Some people don't understand certain disabilities, and we're going to find that with COVID, with people having chronic fatigue and long-term virus effects, that suddenly people are going to suddenly realise that there's all these things happening and there will be a different accommodation made, just the same as when COVID started, when they suddenly did all these internet meetings. Disabled people have been wanting this for years. They kept saying no to students and that, but now we've got COVID, it's suddenly become the norm. So this is how it happens. It's when they understand that we see change. Otherwise, we don't.
Thanks very much. Anybody else would like to have a very quick response to that question? Or shall we move on? Okay, we're going to, I think, yeah, we're going to move on. Okay, so again, we've got heaps of questions, so I'm trying to get through them. The next question was, did you find or feel rejection for jobs, even if it was not implied? How did you deal with it? So it's a question about being rejected from jobs, and I can just see Huhana just almost having a hand attack here. So over to you.
Well, this year I applied. I'm the only person in New Zealand who's ever done this PhD, this area, this field. And I'm one of the leading ones in the world around Indigenous research and disability. I didn't even get an interview for a recent job as a lecturer at Waikato University, and it was in disability studies. I didn't get shortlisted, didn't get interviewed. So I wasn't even seen as a potential because they saw my disability and saw that as the issue. And so, yeah, that's all I've got to say. Yes, I have been rejected multiple times.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say one of the things which we won't be able to touch on today is the whole issue of disabled and non-disabled academics working in disability studies, which is an ongoing issue. Anita, very quick response, please, Anita.
Yeah, no, I would say that while I was, of course, maybe the university topper, so I never had any problems with the job. But I think now, as young disabled people have, gone into, education to a greater level, and I think they find a lot of problems in getting employment, although they have these reservations that we call it, in the sense that some quota which is there for the disabled people where they can get the job, but they try their best to bring it down in like the roster. They're always playing with it, and not really getting the disabled people, as employees, in that sense. But there's a lot of violence, when you are at the workplace. And I think that we must really think of, and I think because of rejection and because of the fact that they try to trouble them as much as they can. It's there.
Thank you very much, Anita. Anne?
I actually had a job until they found out I was disabled. And they found that out when they rang one of my referees who gave me a glowing reference and happened to mention, and she's got a dog. So the kids and the students absolutely love the dog. That offer was withdrawn because, and it was direct, and I could have taken it further, but I thought, what the hell, I don't want to work for this person, because I had a disability. So, yeah.
And sometimes these issues are very hard to, prove, aren't they? Because there's kind of an insidiousness and elusiveness. And I guess one of these things are, and Huhana, you would have seen this, is we might have equalities laws in place, but it's this kind of indirect, more elusive form of discrimination towards disabled people is really hard to prove. I don't know if you have any brief comments on that, Huhana.
Well, part of the problem is that most disabled people don't take a complaint to the Commission. So we get very few disability complaints, and that's part of the issue. I know that America and the UK are very proactive, Australia, but Kiwis are so apathetic and lazy. They sit back and let everyone else moan, and then they won't moan themselves, but allow themselves to be abused. So I get a little tired. I've been on the Commission now for 10 years on the tribunal, and really we've had very few disability cases.
Thanks, Huhana. I wouldn't say it's even in the UK. For example, I just found out, and I've only been in Scotland for 4 years, but the culture around what's called strategic litigation or public interest litigation is really, really low here. And actually, lots of disabled people don't go through the formal complaint process, either because of fear or because of because they're already and also because they're already overwhelmed in the first place, and you need support to go through the logistics of complaining. There's a whole other discussion about the kind of politics of complaint making, and then the other issue is if it gets to the courts, access to justice, the costs. So I think increasingly we are going to have to rely on public interest litigation to test the law. So where cases are brought on behalf of groups. I want to move on because we're doing okay. So this is a question, and I guess it's about indigeneity issues, but I think it applies also more broadly. The question is, how is pride in our disability identity? How can it be cultivated in the academy, much in the same way that Indigenous scholars assert pride in their culture? And I just think that's a really excellent question. That there seems to be this huge leap. You know, you hear of gay pride, you hear of Black Lives Matter, and a very powerful kind of narrative from Black and Brown academics speaking out, having pride in their realities, but speaking out, and yet there seems to be somewhat of an ambivalent situation with disability. It's not necessarily seen as sexy or something that you can scream from the rooftops, yay, I'm disabled. So the issue about how we can have pride in our identity and challenge that internalized ableism. Would somebody like to respond to that? Maybe Anita, because you've had such a long-term experience in this and seen many decades of change. So I'm going to go over to you. Please make sure your microphone is on, Anita.
No, I would say that yes, I mean, you know, a lot of work now has been done in India in that sense, and we have tried to kind of, you know, fight it out. I mean, like, you know, from every angle in that sense. And we seem to be like, you know, the identity. No, but there is always a ambivalence out there, you know, because sometimes they say that you're using the politics. I mean, you know, you're using your identity because something's come your way. I mean, like in the sense, in that sense. And sometimes, of course, there are always, rejections which are there. I mean, like, you know, in that particular sense. But I think people have tried to kind of, you know, pick up these slogans of nothing for us without us, and don't fix us, we are not broken, you know, or you're temporarily able-bodied and all, you know. So these are the ways in which they have, you know, really fought with the able-bodied kind of a society. But I think it will take a long time when they will actually look at it as, you know, in humanity, that all of the difference part can be respected. That I think will take it a long time. I mean, like, you know.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, I can say one thing before we go to Huhana here. One thing hopefully you'll get from today, we as disabled researchers have the amazing skill of perpetual patience and controlling our emotions. You know, it's amazing that we kind of haven't become very angry, uppity women for this panel anyway. But Huhana, open to you, because you cross a number of multiple social worlds here. So pride, Huhana, tell us about this issue.
Oh, kari, mate, sorry. Kari is a Māori word for mate. I'm over pride. I mean, I've been involved in gay pride for over 30, 40 years. And frankly, you know, and I'm sorry to those that want disability pride, but I don't relate to it. I don't relate to it for a couple of reasons. One, why can't we form our own way of celebrating without having to steal from other movements like Black Lives Matter? People use Disability Lives Matter, gay pride, people now using disability pride. It's just stealing off other movements. Create our own slogans that stick. But I don't relate anymore to the Western disability concept. So I don't celebrate what they celebrate because it's not my world. And the more that I move into my Indigenous world, the less I relate to the Western world. And I have to educate our people, frankly. They are way behind the 8 ball when it comes to disability because they don't relate to it either. And so that's a huge problem. Indigeneity and disability, really, we've got to actually ask ourselves, why are we forcing Indigenous peoples to see themselves as a deficit in their identity when they don't see that anyway? If you look at Aboriginal disabilities, you look at Unfinished Business done by Belinda Mason, a fantastic video and photo project that was amazing. She captured the voices. We don't relate in the same way, and it's time to stop forcing us into that Western concept and let us celebrate who we are the way we want to do it, and that is as Māori, that is as Indigenous, and stop forcing us into that box. That's it.
Well, that's it. That's it. I think, you know, you've raised some really interesting issues about what does this pride thing mean anyway. And let's face it, I must say I get a bit sick to death that we've got these kind of, there's, you know, a colour for every group every day. And, you know, it's become so commodified and corporatized and what do we call syrupy and dripping and let's all be nice and happy, but it does do everyday interactions change. So I think, again, it's about the us controlling the discourses. And before we move on to the next question, do you have any thoughts about this?
How can I follow someone like the two ladies who've just gone before me? I do agree. I get really, I don't know. I don't want to be pigeonholed by anybody. And I think that's something for me that attitudes may change, and hopefully they do, but I don't want to be pigeonholed, and I don't want to have to feel pigeonholed to move that forward, if that makes sense. I hope it does.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing, you know, one of the problems with equalities legislation is that it's often in silos, you know, little boxes. And I know that Huhana and I have spoken about this because we fit in many boxes, you know, the kind of sexuality box, and then there's the, I mean, changes from country to country, the race box, and then there's the multiple disability box, and then there's the sex box, and then there's this just religion box. And if I was a cartoonist, I've always said I'd like to do a cartoon of me kind of wheeling from room to room between these kind of, you know, equality meetings. And I think the thing is, not only is that, you know, putting us in boxes, it doesn't allow for the fact that life is a journey. Anita's already spoken about this, you know, it's rich, it's interdependent, and how we make sense of our lived experience is very different. You know, and this is the great thing about this panel. We've got people at different ages, different places, different lived experiences. And, you know, one of the things about the social model and studies in ableism talks about is that disability is always relational, and it's relational to this idea of ableism and able-bodiedness, which, by the way, also is context bound, is historical. You know, so all these kinds of issues. So Anita wants to say something very briefly, and then I've got another question. So Anita, microphone on, Anita. Your mic's still, yep.
Yeah. No, I just want to say one thing from the point of view of the fact that I'm from a developing country, India. You know, I mean, you know, when I wrote on identity politics somewhere in 2003, or when I wrote on stare, you know, gaze and stare in 2003, you know, the West, I don't think reads it up, you know, and we are almost as if, you know, dependent upon the Western and whatever. When Rosemary Garland writes about stare, I think 5 years later than that, or, you know, even Tobin Cybers, who I must say, when I interacted with him, he actually wanted my book and he wanted to look at that. And he said, my God, I mean, I'd never read that, you know, and I'm feeling, I mean, I'm sorry that I did not do. So I feel this drawback as a researcher, that they don't really respect the, whatever is the work which comes from, Huhana would say, indigenous, but the ones who are also from South Asia, you know, where they feel that they haven't really done enough work in that particular sense. I think that is something very serious for me, and I thought I would kind of flag it off for you.
Thank you.
in that sense.
No, thank you. And I'm about to close it, but I do want to raise, so we're about to close down in a minute. I'm going to raise some issues there. I mean, one is about hearing the lived experience. There were some questions about the role of people who identify as able-bodied doing disability studies research. I think that's a really big question. It's a question that I think in the disability studies community has actually resisted. And then the issue about who controls knowledge production, which countries and which authors keep getting a leg up and getting acknowledged. Now we're almost there. Wow. So there's lots of things we haven't covered. I reckon we've got the recipe for multiple sessions here. So you will be hearing more from us. We will be the gang of four running these workshops. That's our thing, and there'll be a book out of it. So I'd like to thank everybody. As I said to you, the session will be recorded and will be available on the University of Dundee's YouTube channel. I would like to thank John Irk and producer Peter Murray, producer Joan Robertson from the Equality and Diversity and Inclusion Office. She's been answering all the questions in the background. Thank you very much for that. And Emma Beat, who's oh wow, I mean, she's been basically the orchestra conductor for this event, sending out the emails, but also keeping us all afloat. So, and I'd like to thank the Peripheries Research Group for sponsoring this event, and we look forward to hearing from you and negotiating with you. Contact us. You've got our names in the invitations. I think everybody here, you can find us on the internet, do a Google search, and I'm sure if you'd like to follow up issues with us, but you will be hearing from the Gang of Four very soon in terms of following up these issues. So thank you again.